Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. If you hate that the NBA offseason was relatively tame in terms of trades in general, not of course including the Wolves, well, you have the Timberwolves to blame, according to apparently many folks around the league. We'll talk about more sour grapes related to the Rudy Gobert trade. I feel like we're talking about this all the time. Plus, a couple of additional Timberwolves moves in addition to the G League roster, and some troubling news regarding Taurean Prince and potentially impacting the Wolves rotation this year. We'll get to all of it here today on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend, and a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, you can find Locked On Wolves anywhere. It's free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. If you'd like to listen on Apple or Google, Spotify or Odyssey, really anywhere, you can find this show and all of your favorite Locked On programs. You can also follow this show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T, and also my account, which is at Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. All right, today on the show, plenty to talk about. There was some news that broke late Thursday related to Taurean Prince. We'll get to that later in the show. Also, the Wolves traded for Nik Stauskas. The Iowa Wolves traded for Nik Stauskas. So he's now in the Timberwolves organization, a former lottery pick from, believe it or not, almost a decade ago. We'll get to that a little bit too. I want to start, though, with a topic that I'll admit I've talked about this previously on the show. It's been probably a few weeks. But it's cropped up again in light of still no trade movement. Apparently, Kevin Durant won't be traded anytime soon with him reconciling with the Brooklyn Nets front office and apparently coaching staff. And then also the lack so far of a Donovan Mitchell trade. Now, that could change in the next month as we lead into training camps, really, I guess, in the next 3 weeks or so. But sitting here right now in late August, there is no Donovan Mitchell trade apparently on the horizon. There likely won't be a Kevin Durant trade. And the Wolves, once again, are in, I guess, the crosshairs maybe, or the hot seat is maybe a better term, of the rest of the league in regards to the way that the offseason unfolded. And the Wolves are being blamed for the lack of this large amount of player movement. Now there was still some, but no Donovan Mitchell, no Kevin Durant, no other substantial trades made, and it's come up again this week. It was a report by Michael Scotto over at Hoops Hype who brought this back to light. He talked about it in an article over there at Hoops Hype. I'll just read the direct quote. He says, in the article, numerous NBA executives who spoke with Hoops Hype believe that the Rudy Gobert trade made it harder for Kevin Durant to be moved. The draft pick compensation Utah received from Minnesota was considered such a lopsided haul for Utah around the league that if the Nets got anything less than that for Durant, Brooklyn's front office would have looked foolish, according to numerous rival executives. Now, he goes on to talk about Donovan Mitchell as well. Similar situation. Obviously, Donovan Mitchell not on the same level as Kevin Durant. And we could argue about Mitchell versus Gobert. The Jazz apparently believe that Donovan Mitchell's worth more than Rudy Gobert. And so here we are again with the rest of the league pointing fingers at the Timberwolves and saying, well, if you're mad that there wasn't more movement, it's the Wolves' fault because they paid too much for Rudy Gobert. And I get that. Like, it makes sense. The concept makes sense, right? That the Wolves did trade to get Rudy Gobert. And that's sure, fine. In a vacuum, yes. If you're looking at the actual, was Rudy Gobert worth 5 first-round picks plus everything else the Wolves gave up, all those rotational players, the pick swap in addition to the 5 first-rounders, including Walker Kessler, this year's draft pick? No, Rudy Gobert is not actually worth that much, but he's worth that much to the Wolves. How else were the Wolves going to get another top 25 player to Minnesota, somebody who's under contract for the next few years that is still in his prime, albeit the back half of his prime? So, yeah, the Wolves in a vacuum paid more than anybody should ever pay for a player that's not a top, I don't know, probably top 10 player in the league even. I don't, maybe even in that 6 to 10 range. You don't usually want to trade that many picks for a player like that. Gobert is more solidly in the top 25. You could argue top 20 players in the league. So, yeah, in a vacuum, the Wolves paid too much. But as we've said before, Gobert on his contract, the caliber player he is, the market the Timberwolves are in, and then also the strengths that Gobert has that line up really well with the weaknesses of Towns and frankly, the rest of the Timberwolves roster, right? The Wolves lacked in rim protection as a team. They lacked in defensive rebounding as a team. This isn't solely on Towns. Naz Reid's not a great rim protector or a great defensive rebounder either. Rudy Gobert is fantastic at both, arguably the best in the league at both of those things, arguably the best defensive big in the league over the past 3 to 5 years. Um, this trade for the Wolves and what they gave up, even if it's an overpay in a vacuum, it makes sense for Minnesota. And here's the thing. I think John Krasinski of The Athletic actually pointed this out the other day on Twitter around the time this reporting came out. I, I mean, that's another plus in regards to the trade for the Timberwolves, right? If you keep Kevin Durant out of the Western Conference, whether that was to Phoenix or any other Western Conference team, that's a win for the Timberwolves. So, and I don't think that I'm not at all suggesting that was like why Tim Connelly made the deal, obviously. But if it's an ancillary benefit, if it's something that came, I'm no doubt this came up in conversation. These guys are thinking of all these potential moves in the Timberwolves front office from every which way, every possible angle. And they knew the chat. I mean, the Wolves called Brooklyn. Remember, there were the multiple reports. The Timberwolves and Brooklyn had conversations, and Brooklyn said, "Well, you have to have, Towns or Ant." They might have even asked for. I'm sure they probably even started by asking for both. We have to have both of these guys to make this trade work, and the Wolves obviously said no. The Wolves very well knew that Brooklyn was shopping Kevin Durant, but the Wolves struck first. The Wolves ponied up and sure overpaid for Rudy Gobert. And they had to have known that it was going to impact the trade market for the rest of the summer. And lo and behold, it did. It stands as by far the biggest trade of the entire offseason. The Timberwolves knew exactly what they were doing. They improved their roster. They kept Kevin Durant out of the Western Conference. They found a player that fills a lot of the holes, helps strengthen the Wolves in a lot of the areas where they had big weaknesses. And that seems like a win all the way around for the Wolves. Now, yeah, in 2 or 3 years, we could talk about whether or not losing those draft picks, how much that's actually hurting, right? But sitting here right now, um, it's understandable why the Wolves made that overpay. And there's lots of folks around the league. Again, in a vacuum, no. Is he worth that? Is Rudy Gobert worth all of that stuff? No. To the Timberwolves right now, where they're at. And also, this isn't the final piece to a championship team because Anthony Edwards has to be a true superstar if this team is going to compete for the finals. Could that happen this year? Possibly. Is it more likely to happen in the next couple of years? Yes. But a 31 or 32-year-old Rudy Gobert with a prime Karl-Anthony Towns and a yet to be in his prime superstar Anthony Edwards could be a title contending team. So that's what the Wolves need to take that next step. It's the growth primarily from Anthony Edwards. It's continued defensive improvement from Towns. It's effort on defense from D'Angelo Russell and a few other things. But the biggest thing is Ant's improvement is what's going to take them from a nice second round team where they are now, likely 50, certainly more than 50 wins, a 3, 4, 5 seed in the West, probably a second round exit, maybe conference finals, to a potential finals contender. They're probably only an Anthony Edwards year or two away of growth. Away from having that conversation seriously. Okay, next I want to talk about the Wolves' most recent trade. They did add Nik Stauskas to the organization. I want to talk about that, what he's been up to the past few years. Then we'll get into the end of the roster, or really, I guess, the middle of the rotation, and the troubling Taurean Prince news that broke late Thursday. We're going to do that here next. First, let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. Of course, NFL preseason's wrapping up this weekend, so get in your over-unders and win totals for the NFL season before that kicks off. Of course, baseball's still ongoing. NHL is only a couple weeks away, and then NFL regular season's only 2-3 weekends away, I guess. College football starts up next weekend, believe it or not, which is just actually, I think there might even be some games this weekend. So now's the time to get to betonline.net and place your bets for all those sports here this fall. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sport wagering information, from live in-game betting to scores and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to Bet Online today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. Bet Online, where the game starts. All right, so the Timberwolves continue to, add. This is the time of year where they're kind of tweaking around the edges. We talked about Luke Garza. I think that was Wednesday's show. He's signing an Exhibit 10 deal. Of course, the former Iowa Hawkeye star added to the organization on Exhibit 10, meaning he's essentially, it's almost like a preferred walk-on in some sense in college, where he gets a guarantee. Well, I guess this part's not the same, but he gets a guaranteed roster bonus essentially for coming to camp. He gets another bonus if he sticks with the Iowa Wolves, assuming he doesn't end up on an NBA deal. If he stays in the organization for 60 days and plays in the G League with Iowa, he gets an additional bonus. He's got an inside track with the organization and all that. So Garza's on one of those deals. CJ Ellaby's on one of those deals. We've talked a lot about him. The Wolves, the Iowa Wolves, who just recently, actually, I think on Thursday, confirmed who their new general manager was, new director of basketball operations with the Wolves, or director of, I guess, scouting operations or something like that was the official title. A gentleman who was in Denver with Tim Connelly is also now the general manager of the Iowa Wolves. And he made a trade swapping the rights to Chris Silva for Nik Stauskas. Now, Chris Silva, of course, played in one NBA game with the Wolves, that win over the Celtics right after Christmas last year. He played like 2 minutes for the Wolves. He's bounced around the league a little bit and was back in the G League. They're trading his rights for the rights to Nik Stauskas, and presumably Stauskas will be a part of the training camp, given his contract status. I'm the name has escaped me for the actual. It's not an Exhibit 10 deal, but there's a basically something in the wording of his contract where it seems as though he'll likely be in training camp. The team hasn't confirmed that, but it seems pretty likely Stauskas will be in training camp with the Wolves. No doubt, if you're a Big Ten basketball fan, you've heard of Nik Stauskas. Of course, spent his collegiate career at Michigan. He was a lottery pick, number 8 overall. Believe it or not, this was all the way back in 2014 when Stauskas was drafted, which is, I mean, what is that? 8 years now. 8 years he's been in professional basketball, and over the course of those 8 years, he's played for 7 different NBA organizations. He played for 2 teams in Spain, and he played in the G League. So he's, what is that? A total of 11 or 12 organizations in the past 8 years since he's been in the league. He was drafted 8th overall by Sacramento. He was traded to Philadelphia after his first season, spent 2.5 years with the Sixers, was traded to Brooklyn, or I think waived and signed with Brooklyn, spent the next year between Portland and Cleveland, played in Spain in EuroLeague and one other league in 1920. And then that year, of course, was cut short by COVID. The following year, he played just in the G League. He played 12 games in the G League during the next COVID shortened year. And then last season, he bounced around a little, spent a total of 8 games in the NBA, 2 with Miami and 6 with the Boston Celtics, bringing his total of NBA teams to 7, again, over 8 seasons, plus some international play in the mix there. At the NBA level, of course, his whole thing was supposed to be shooting, and he's only a 35.4% three-point shooter across those 7 seasons in the NBA. Now, we're still only talking about, 343 NBA games, under 20 minutes per game over his NBA career, just over 3 3-point attempts per game, 3 1/3 shots per game from downtown, 35.4%. In Spain, he played 22 games in EuroLeague in 1920, and he shot 42% from 3 there. Overall in Europe, 37% from 3. And then a couple of seasons ago in the G League over 12 games, he shot 35.2%. So he's really been in that 35 to 37% range, which is at this point, that's league average at the NBA level. 10 years ago, it was above league average. Now you're in 35 to 37% range. You're right. You're hovering right around league average when it comes to NBA, 3-point shooters. So it really doesn't do him any favors in terms of his prospects of sticking with the NBA roster. He's still got good size for shooting guard. He's 6'6". He doesn't do a whole lot else. He's not a good defender. He doesn't put the ball on the floor and create for himself or for others very much. He really is just kind of a big-bodied guard who can give you a little bit of length. He doesn't rebound the ball, though, all that well for his size. The hope is that the shooting stroke can actually stick. And to this point, it hasn't. And we're talking about almost a decade that he's bounced around. So don't at all think for a moment he's going to make the Timberwolves team. If he does, something's gone drastically wrong. But I think it's very likely he ends up with the Iowa Wolves, and he's only played the one season really in the G League. So perhaps he gets the opportunity to stick in Iowa and do some damage there and get another opportunity at some point to get back to the NBA. But that's another addition the Wolves have made on the fringes of the roster. Just another recognizable name. You know, he falls in that same category as Garza, CJ Ellaby, AJ Lawson, these guys who have bounced around a little. They're familiar to college basketball fans or to, G League fans, people who paid attention to Summer League, especially in the case of a couple of these guys. So a name many folks will recognize, but not likely a name to make an impact here for the Wolves in the near future, at least. All right, let's close the show with the Taurean Prince news. Not a fun topic to talk about, but I want to discuss what we know so far, recording this late Thursday, early Friday. And, the early returns on what happens if he ends up, if the worst happens, he's not on the roster. I shouldn't say early returns, early speculation. I don't want to speculate too much, but where I think Prince sits in the Wolves' potential rotation and who may have to step in and fill some of those minutes if this doesn't go well for Taurean Prince and the Timberwolves in terms of the legal proceedings that are going to be upcoming. All right, we're going to do all that here next, and we'll close out the show here for the week. All right, Taurean Prince, it was reported Thursday evening in multiple places. KSTP Channel 5 in the Twin Cities was one of the first to pick it up that Prince had been arrested at the Miami International Airport, according on a warrant that was issued in Texas. Taurean Prince originally from Texas. Of course, he played at Baylor University in Texas, and he was recently there for actually a charity event. But he was arrested on a warrant, a fugitive out-of-state warrant at Miami International Airport. This is all reporting from KSTP and also Chris Hine at the Star Tribune. We don't know much else other than there are some reports out there by some reputable, outlets regarding there being some dangerous drug charges. Put that in quotes because that's an actual. Without getting too much into the brief amount of legal research I did for this, that's a classification in Texas. Can mean a lot of things. And so we really don't know at the time I'm recording this, and perhaps by the time you're listening to it over the weekend, there's a bit more information that's coming out. But all we know is that he was arrested on a warrant out of Texas. It had to do reportedly with drug charges. He has been arrested. The Timberwolves, all they said is that they were aware that the alleged report, they called the report alleged, actually, aware of the alleged report regarding Taurean Prince and are in the process of gathering more information. That's the statement the Timberwolves issued. So I don't want to speculate on what that actually could mean for Taurean from a legal perspective, because we don't even really know what the charges actually are, what potential sentence that could carry, if the team or the league could discipline him. At this moment, sitting here right now, from a basketball perspective, Taurean Prince is what I would call, he's somewhere between the 7th and 8th man on this roster. I had him on my starters: D'Angelo Russell, Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert. The first couple guys off the bench, Kyle Anderson's the first one, I think, in terms of minutes per game. And then depending on the night, your 7 and 8 guys in some order are Taurean Prince and Jalen Noel. I think the plan was to let Taurean Prince be your primary backup 3. He can play some small ball 4. He can create a little bit off the bench depending on the type of night Noel's having or what the having or what the matchup might look like. Prince could be your big-bodied 3 that can function as a 2 at times, knock down spot-up shots, guard bigger players, a better defender certainly than Jalen Noel. So if he's unavailable for any significant stretch, this is obviously a significant blow. Now, Kyle Anderson is better than Taurean Prince. If we're just comparing them as players, I think Kyle Anderson was brought in to do a lot of the things Taurean Prince was being asked to do last year, which was essentially help guide that second unit when at times they could be listless. They didn't, depending on how the rotations were staggered by Chris Finch or foul trouble, etc. Sometimes Prince was asked to do a bit more than he was probably should have been because of injuries. If Beverly was unavailable or whatever might have happened. But he's also not an ideal 4. Like, he can play the 4, he can play some small ball 4, but he's so cold from 3. He just never really got on track offensively until late in the season. Kyle Anderson is an initiator. He is a facilitator. No, he's not as good of a shooter as Taurean Prince. It's not really all that close, but he can score a little better off the bounce. He can facilitate for others. He's a better overall defender. He's a little bit longer, bigger. He's more of a 4 that can play small ball 5 and the 3 in a pinch, where Prince is a 3 that can play small ball 4 and play the 2 in a pinch. So I think what this would do is Anderson sees a few more minutes, potentially even at the 3. Naz Reid sees a few more minutes. I had him penciled in at 8 to 10 minutes a game, depending on matchups, depending on how you can stagger Towns and Gobert at the 5. You still want them on the floor together some, and especially if there's some foul trouble, Naz Reid becomes that next man up to play some minutes at the 5. But now, is it more minutes for Towns and Gobert each at the 5 and Naz at the 4 and Anderson at the 3? Or does everybody slide the other way? And does Austin Rivers, Bryn Forbes, or even the rookie Wendell Moore, do any of them get more run? If this became a longer term thing, I think Josh Minot's actually the better fit for that type of a role. I just don't think there's any reason to believe he'd be ready to go this fall, for a team that's trying to win 50 plus games and get home court advantage in the playoffs. You're not going to put a second rounder in that rotation role right away. So I think in the near term, if this is a big if, because we don't know, this is early, but if Prince ends up missing any time, I think it's probably I think it's more minutes for Anderson, slightly more minutes for Naz Reid, depending on matchups. And then Rivers and Moore are the next kind of guys up. If it's a smaller team you're playing against, Rivers probably. If it's a bigger team, Moore gets those minutes and Noel stays at the 2. But it would obviously be a huge blow for everybody, for the Timberwolves and obviously for Taurean Prince if this ends up impacting his season. And of course, we have to let everything play out from a legal perspective. We don't know at all. Again, I want to reiterate exactly what this is going to mean. But, it's hard not to. Is a basketball podcast. We got to look at this from a basketball perspective. And if he misses time, how does the Wolves' depth stack up? We'll obviously spend more time on that as we learn more. If we find out more over the weekend, we'll talk about it on Monday as we inch ever closer to training camp. All right. That's all we have for you on the show here today. Of course, we'll be back on Monday. 3 shows again next week, planned for Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. A big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. The Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. And a reminder, you can make your second listen the Locked On NBA show. Get up to date on the latest news and rumors in the league in just 30 minutes every single day with Locked On NBA. Locked On NBA, your daily NBA update in just 30 minutes. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.